Good evening. I'm Dr. Grace Telesco, and welcome to the Criminal Justice Forum. We're live streaming from the NSU Fischler College of Education and School of Criminal Justice YouTube channel. Each of our programs examine exciting topics in the field of criminal justice, and all of our guests bring fascinating and thought-provoking topics to life, as each of our educational programs bridge the gap between theory and practice. Welcome to the Criminal Justice Forum. Good evening, everybody. This is Dr. Grace Telesco, and I am with NSU's Fischler College of Education and School of Criminal Justice. And we are live streaming, as we just now said, on our YouTube channel. Thank you for joining me tonight. And thank you for joining me each and every time we have the Criminal Justice Forum. Tonight, we have our dear friend and guest, Ed Dentzel. And Ed Dentzel is a missing persons expert who has a podcast called Unfound. And we have had a wonderful relationship and a wonderful collaboration with Ed, I want to say, going on almost 3 years now. And it's really wonderful. He's come to our campus a few times, and he's spoken to our criminal justice students. I love his fan base. I love his fans. His fans are very loyal to me, and I really do appreciate that so much for their loyalty, for tuning in. Ed does his show every single week, and but they still continue to be here, to be present for us, and to really have such lively discussions. I want to have a disclaimer today. Today in one of the cable channels, there was an article that came out about true crime sleuths and journalists who, these armchair sleuths who think that they self-proclaimed kind of investigative reporters, investigative journalists, let's say, that they're all over the place. They're popping up everywhere. And I want to be really, really clear here about two things about tonight's show. Number one is I want to talk about my guest for a minute, Ed Dentzel. All right. So Ed is a journalist. He is a filmmaker, an actor, and a podcast host. I've known him now really well. I've gotten to really know Ed in a really great way. And off screen, we're friends. We text each other regularly, and I adore him. Right. So what you're going to say? Well, then, Dr. Telesco, you're biased. Well, maybe I am, but I think I'm a really good judge of character, and that's my 20 years NYPD law enforcement experience as an investigator and as an administrator and as a trainer. But more importantly, from the family of wolves, because I think I have the same DNA as a wolf. I think I can smell it when it's something's not right. Ed's work is impeccable. Ed's work is brilliant, in my opinion. So much so, I'm not the only one that thinks that. Besides his fan base, besides that, he has helped so many family members give voice to the unfound. Right? Literally, that's the name of his show. And I think he has the utmost integrity, and I always honor him for how he cares so much about the victims and their families. And he always reports just the facts, and then tries to, put them out there and give them voice. Well, I'm not the only one that thinks that about him, because he has been called to testify at a homicide trial pretty recently. And, his testimony was centered around the podcast and the guest on the show and all of that. But what I do want to say is, the judicial system doesn't just willy-nilly grab folks off the street if they don't know what they're talking about. So they have complete and total trust in him, as do I. And so when Ed came to me last week, I think it was last week, and said, what do we want to do for the show? Because he's on every month. He's my regular guest. And he said, what do you want to do? And I always like to leave it up to him. He's the one that knows this work more than I do, right? And we're not in the entertainment business, even though a lot of my colleagues might call me Hollywood. The truth of the matter is that I'm a criminal justice professor and a former retired law enforcement person. And so, what I do as the host of the Criminal Justice Forum is not entertainment, which is what true crime shows are. They're entertainment. Our goal and our motivation here at NSU, the School of Criminal Justice, and the Criminal Justice Forum, which is a YouTube show program where we feature guests who are in the field of criminal justice, and that includes journalists, that includes the media, right? So I'm excited about tonight. Ed came to me and said, let's do something that's current. Let's look at the Idaho murders through the context and lens of missing persons cases, because he is going to explain how missing persons cases and homicide cases have a lot in common and have a lot of correlations and associations and relationships. So the caveat here, the disclaimer, and I'm going to bring it on in a second, is that we're always sensitive. And this is a sensitive topic. It's a sensitive topic, whether it just happened or it happened 20 years ago. The families of these victims, either missing persons or homicide victims, families never get over it. There's no closure. There's no such thing as that, right? And in college communities or high school communities like Stoneman Douglas, for example, or communities like Surfside, New Orleans, when Hurricane Sandy hit in the Rockaways, or even in New Dorp, Staten Island, these communities that experience a critical incident experience a traumatic event. There's a ripple effect, right? And so the trauma is real, and we want to make sure that we are honoring where people are coming from. And so this show tonight, and we call it a show, but it's a forum. It's a forum for academic analysis. It's a forum for practitioner analysis, because that's the beauty of criminal justice, by the way. It's not just criminology. It's criminology plus practitioners, right? Which is, whole field of criminal justice is huge. And so I'm excited about tonight, but there's nothing exciting about it when we're talking about trauma, and we're talking about a critical incident, and we're talking about a traumatic event for everyone involved, including the suspect. So I want us to understand and know that not only do we operate here with the utmost standards in academia, but the utmost standards in criminal justice, the utmost standards of empirical analysis. Like all of these things we try to adhere to in a very ethical way with the utmost integrity and the utmost sensitivity, because nobody knows this really. Well, maybe I'm gonna edit that. I'm not even going to say nobody knows this better than me, but I know this very well. And the reason I know this very well is because I was a first responder at Ground Zero. I say that a lot. Because it's very much a part of the fabric of who I am. And so when someone talks about 9/11, I hold my breath for a minute. So I understand, and so does Ed, the trauma experienced by critical incidents like the one that happened in Idaho, we understand the severity of that, the tragedy of that. And in no way is this exploitive or capitalizing. This is taking a current event, as we usually do, and analyzing it through an academic lens. So I'm going to bring on my guest, Ed. That was a very long opener, Ed. I apologize. I took a chunk of 10 minutes out of your content, but I thought it was important, Ed, because in light of this, the CNN came out with an article today about true crime and all of that. And I don't consider you that, and you don't consider you that. You're a missing persons expert who has a podcast. And well, I honor you, my friend.
Thanks.
And we are really interested in hearing what you have to say tonight. And I'll butt in every once in a while. You'll know I'm going to butt in because my little square will come up, and it means I'd like to interject a little something. But with no further ado, Ed, please take it away.
Thanks, Dr. Telesco. Happy to be here again. It's been a couple months, and it's because it's been a couple months since we got together that I decided when you asked me, what are we going to talk about on January 26, 2023, that I thought we should talk about the murders in Idaho for a few different reasons that I'll go through right now that have nothing to do with fascination. It has everything to do with looking at what happened, looking at it from an investigation point of view, from a media point of view, from a criminal justice point of view, and try to think about why did it happen and how can we prevent it happening again? Now, we all know, of course, the United States, probably another murder is going to happen, might be one happening right now, but that doesn't mean we can't still learn something from things that have happened. We always want the murder rate to go down, the violent crime rate to go down. And this is one of the ways we can do this, by really, really looking at this from an education point of view and not a fascination point of view. And I think that anybody who follows Unfound, the podcast that comes out every Friday, or the videos that I put up on YouTube, first and foremost, I am about education. I am trying to teach my audience about disappearances, why they happen, what goes wrong with the investigations of them, why do they remain unsolved for so long, and what can we all do to change that? Not just law enforcement, not just families and friends, but just the general public. That is the attitude. Every time I come to this microphone right here, that is my attitude. And so that is the same with what we'll be discussing tonight, the very horrible murders of Ethan, Kaylee, Zana, and Madison. So we're just going to go, this is just going to be a coverage of the general facts, because Dr. Telesco and I, after this, we're going to be talking about general ideas about what has gone on since these 4 students were murdered. What has been good, what has been bad, and how do we change this? What really went wrong? How can it be changed? So starting on November 13th, 2022, 4 Idaho University students were killed. Their names are Ethan Chapin, he was a freshman, 20 years old. Kaylee Gonsalves, 21 years old, she was a senior. Zana Kernodle, 20, she was a junior. And Madison Mogan, she was 21, also a senior. The way it was that night when they were murdered, that Zana and Ethan, who were a couple, were in one room on one floor, and Kaylee and Madison were in their own room on another floor. And there are actually 2 other, we then learned later that there were 2 other young women also in the building who were not harmed that night. So what we must understand, first of all, what makes this, to really look at this from an investigation point of view of thinking about someone, of course, they thought maybe it might have been multiple people at the time, someone who goes into a building that is 3 stories tall and kills people on 2 different floors. That is very, very rare. Okay, we have to understand that is very, very rare. This is a 3-story apartment. There were entrances on both the first and second floor. So the building was kind of on a, what we might call a slope. So you could go in from the front on the first floor, on the back to the second floor, and then the third floor was not accessible from the outside. You had to go into the first or second floor to get up to the third floor. There were a total of 5 females who lived in the building. Ethan, the young man, did not live in the building, but he was there because his girlfriend was there. And as like I said before, 2 females survived the attack. In fact, it's not clear, at least it wasn't to me, and trying to put all this information together, whether this killer knew those 2 other young women were there or not. I guess we're probably thinking no, given what we'll talk about later, but it's still somewhat unclear because it does seem that one of them saw him, but he did not see her. So before it happened, earlier that morning or the night before, each of the pairs spent night at different places, but all 4 were home by 2 a.m. that early morning. And from that point until roughly 3 a.m., there was a series of many calls and texts. A lot was made of one of these girls texting an ex-boyfriend. And there were a lot of communications going out, a lot of communications going back. But because of this one particular lot of messaging going to this one person who was a young man, he became a person of interest early on. Of course, we now know that he had nothing to do with any of this. At 4 a.m., they received a food order. So this would just be minutes before all of this happened. At 4 a.m., there was a food order. And so that we then move on to this. Sometime around 4:10 to 4:15 a.m., Kaylee and her dog, something was going on. As the roommates, the 2 surviving roommates noted, the dog was barking, there was whimpering. They could hear one of the girls saying something, even though these 2 others, one was on the same floor, I think one might have been on a different floor, but they knew something was going on, not quite sure what it was. And in fact, one of them stated later that Zana said something like, "There's someone here." So then at 4:17 a.m., there was whimpering, thuds, a dog barking, and the roommate on the second floor opens her door and she sees a figure in black leaving through the glass door on the second floor. Like I said, there were 2 different entrances, one on the ground floor, which was like a garage entrance type of thing, and then the sliding glass door on the second floor, which we would say is on the back of the building. This young woman saw this person leave through the second floor, and at that point, neither of these 2 other young women had realized what had just happened. So there was no screaming, no yelling, no scrambling, no running, nothing like that. They just heard dog whimpering, barking, some whispering, things like that. No screaming or yelling, which, of course, early on when people were finding out about this, they found that to be very strange. And maybe it's still strange. Maybe it's still something that, is very surprising. I think this flies in the face of what we generally understand about when crimes like this happen, especially when the weapon is a knife and not a gun. Something to think about. The perception is that maybe the killings on the second floor happened first, then he went up to the third floor, or maybe he did go to the third floor first and then came back down to the second floor. But moving on. So the aftermath of this. So these 4 were stabbed to death. All 4 of them, 2 on one floor, 2 on the other floor, 2 on the third floor, 2 on the second floor. But strangely, 911 wasn't called until many hours later, probably because these 2 other women there really did not at that point understand what went on. And early on, and this is what we're going to get into a little bit later, hopefully, myself and Dr. Telesco, a lot was made of this. And automatically people started thinking, the 911 call wasn't, till hours later. Did these people really not know? Did these 2 really not know what happened there? And then when the call came in, it wasn't even from a person in the building. It was somebody else using one of those person's phone. Could be a few things going on. Given what I do, talking about disappearances, studying them, interviewing family members, we can't discount the factor of shock. People not understanding what's happening right at that moment, experiencing something they never thought that they would see or hear ever in their lives, but they do. Being that Dr. Telesco has had experience with 9/11, very much a lot of people suffered shock, and that PTSD, very, very common, not just for the first responders, but just for your average New Yorker, for people who were there on that day, very common. So the scene, all four were killed in their beds. It looks like they were surprised. There were no bindings, no gagging of their mouths, no tying of hands behind their backs, nothing like that. But they were stabbed violently to the point that there was blood on the walls. Schools ended up being canceled. Maybe we're not surprised by that. In addition, given that when this happened, there was like a break going on. A lot of students, because it was unsolved at the time, students not coming back to class. And in fact, professors were just outright canceling classes. So it wasn't even just students missing class. There weren't even any classes to go to. And many of them saying, we're not going back to class until this is solved. Can't really argue with that. You really cannot argue with that mentality, especially since they didn't know who did it. What were the reasons? Was this somebody, another student? Was this somebody from off campus? Was there more than one person? Makes all the sense in the world. Now, what
Ed,
I also
I'm gonna just interrupt just a second. So, how do you know that? How do you know that information about the professors? And because I want to speak to that for a second.
Sure.
When we talk about a crisis event occurring, a critical incident occurring, and there being a lack of communication or a lack of clear direction, like on what to do, right? Yeah. So I want to just like ask you to clarify for the viewers. How do you know that? That
was written many places. You could have found that on. You could find that on CNN, Fox News, local news. Just professors coming right out. I didn't write down any names of any professors in any of this, but they just were stating we're just not going to hold class because of this. That was widely reported back at the time.
Now I know, like I must sound like an old salt now. Like I always am bringing up 9/11, but it's my experience, right? So, on the morning of September 11th, I was teaching a class at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And interestingly, and those of you who know me know that interestingly, the title was Crisis Intervention Using Theater Techniques. And the day of 9/11, that morning, I was supposed to be teaching crisis intervention, like what is a crisis, like the definitions. Well, we know what happened on 9/11. And by the time I got to my classroom, the second plane had already hit. They had already hit the Pentagon. No one at the school, and this isn't an indictment against the school, but no one in the school said anything about letting classes out or anything. But I mean, my law enforcement background and all that, like it was obvious that we needed to cancel class. And I advised my students to get out of the building, leave the building. Now, professors sometimes have the wherewithal to do that, to say, listen, we don't know what's going on. It may not be safe, and releasing the class. So I think that this is something that sometimes happens in a critical incident where it's and mass casualties or whatever it might be, where there's a miscommunication or no communication. And that's a lesson learned, right? That we can have going forward.
Yeah. And what's something maybe I should also bring out, being that I just interviewed you about a month or 6 weeks ago, you also talked about, I just mentioned shock. You encountered at least a couple police officers and getting down to ground zero who were certainly suffering from shock. In fact, I remember you saying, well, I'm just going to take that radio from you and I'll get it back to you later, correct?
Yeah, the officer said, take my radio, Lieutenant. It's the end of the world. And when I don't care what your training is. I mean, if the more training we have, the better prepared we are, obviously. But we never know what's going to happen until we're involved in it. Until we're part of that community, the community where I was talking about, this ripple effect of trauma that goes throughout a community.
Mm-hmm. So if a New York Police Department officer can suffer shock, then certainly a couple young women who are coming upon a crime scene, a horrible, horrific crime scene, certainly you can understand why they suffered from shock as well. So moving on, the police, very early on, I guess the perception is that they made a big mistake. They first said there was no risk to the community, and then immediately turned around and it was like, well, wait a minute. How would you know that? You don't know who did this. You don't know the motivations and everything. And then they immediately turned it around with within 24 hours or even quicker, that they said, well, there could be a risk. Maybe we'll talk, Dr. Telesco and I'll talk about that a little later. So the agencies that were eventually involved, certainly the Moscow local police, the state police of Idaho, and then also the sheriff's office, the county where this happened. They were all involved. The autopsies showed no sexual assault. And maybe, at least at the time, maybe we shouldn't have been surprised by that, given that I think it was very well known early on that all of this happened very quickly. So there no time for a sexual assault. There were some defensive wounds on the victims, but not as many maybe as you might expect in a knife attack. It was a large knife, and most of the stabbing was to the stomach and upper torso area. At the same time as the police were trying to get a handle on this, as is often the case, something like this happens, got thousands and thousands of tips and calls. I think I read it. I have a statistic typed down in my notes, which are off to my left. By Christmas, so that was like a month after this happened, a little over a month, maybe 5 weeks, they had 15,000 different leads. 15,000. And I now that we know, of course, we're going to talk about who the killer is here before we're done. I'm not sure any of them had anything to do with him. This is what makes investigations so tough. This is why on Unfound, we are not anti-police. We're not pro-police. We're realistic. This is common. Something gets out there and suddenly all these calls and emails and messages start coming in. I know something, I know something, I know something. And most of the time, none of these people know anything. Very, very common, very common. So at the time, as the investigation started, they were conflicted. One or more, was there one killer or was there more? They were conflicted, of course, because there were 4 victims on 2 different floors. You would think, going back to the beginning of when I started talking, about this tonight, that you would think this does sound like something that would be done by more than one person. They were conflicted. Wasn't sure. It seemed like it was the same knife used for all 4, but maybe there were 2 killers and they had the same kind of knife. Maybe. So, but there was video, and this was big in this case. You should know that video, in my opinion, regarding crime and my specialty disappearances, it's a bit overrated, video. But it was a big deal in this case, and it certainly put police on the right track. Most importantly, there was a lot of video that didn't show anything, which is common. And there was even some video, I think, misled them for a while, specifically from that food truck. There seemed to be a guy standing in the background following 2 of the girls. He is not the suspect. That is not the man we now know to be the killer. But that had a lot of people looking at that and being very, concentrating on him quite a bit. But one of the videos, or more than one video, caught law enforcement's eye. It was a 2010 to 2015 Hyundai Elantra, which is like their smallest sedan. It was white, so it's a very generic type of car. But it was cruising around the area quite a bit around this time. And then at that time of roughly 4:20 a.m. of that morning, it went speeding away. And luckily, they had enough information to, of course, identify the car. Did it have any distinguishing markings? Was it wrecked? The license plate, etc. And if you might even remember early on, when they discovered that this car probably has something to do with the killings, that They discovered a car in the state of Washington, and there was somebody sleeping in it, and everybody thought, oh, this is it. They're going to catch the killer. That was not the car, and that was not the killer. This is how these investigations often go. Now, on social media, everybody talking, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, elsewhere, did one of these girls have a stalker? Or did did multiple girls have a stalker, or multiple girls have multiple stalkers? And this is something we always have to consider, because the FBI stats have been consistent for decades now. 80% of the time when violent crime happens, the person who is harmed is being harmed by someone who knows them. This is not a total stranger random attack. 80% of the time. And in fact, I will tell you, in disappearances, I've estimated that about between 60 and 65% of the disappearances that I've covered on Unfound are murders. And of those, about 95% of those have certainly been done by people who knew the missing person, certainly. So and also because of social media, they contacted the ex, because there was a lot of contact going on right before these killings happened. DNA was collected, and they did discover that there was some DNA there that was not any of the victims. And it ended up being on the sheath of a knife that was left behind. This is not something that came out until after the killer was caught. This is not something they released early on. In fact, much of what we now know are things they held back at the time. For example, it wasn't until he was caught that it came out that this girl, a student, saw him walking out of the building. I'm guessing they did that for her safety. I'm guessing, which I don't think anybody can argue with that. As far as technology, the collections of phones pinging in the area off the towers at the time. And what's interesting about this, for a totally different reason, I was just reading an article. There is now a case working its way through state courts into federal court, deciding if this kind of information gathering is constitutional. It's still working its way. Of course, defense attorneys, civil rights attorneys are saying this kind of feels like like a fishing expedition instead of something that is constitutional. But this is one of the instruments, one of the tools they had in trying to narrow down, well, who was near that building at the time? Public opinion, media, very critical, which I think is disgusting. I am in the media. I have a podcast. I consider myself not to be a missing persons expert, but I have a podcast that is a form of media, no different than doing this video. I consider myself to be a reporter, talking to people, getting the information out there. And I can tell you, as a person in the media, I found most of the coverage of what went on. Pick a station, pick a YouTube channel, just pick one. It was pretty much all disgusting. The way that people want instant gratification, instant results, it's just not realistic. A lot of people talking about things, they have no idea they should be talking about them at all. But that's what was going on. A lot of people saying, I think this is all too above their heads. We got to get the FBI involved and everything. I don't know what these people expect. 4 people are murdered. I cannot imagine walking in there. I'm going to guess none of those police, at least, probably have covered some murders, but nothing quite like this. Generally, they know what they're doing. If it was a missing persons case, maybe I might have a little bit of a different view. But when it comes to murders, we have a pretty good handle on, the process of collecting information and looking at it. But you got to give the process time. Even the families leaking info, the police won't tell them anything. This is all very common. The last thing the family should ever want, and I tell this to my own guests, is that the last thing you want is for some police officers to have loose lips, and then that damages the investigation, and then the killer or killers get off on a technicality. That is the last thing you want. More than anything else, that is the last thing you want. You're just going to have to trust sometimes that the wheels of justice are moving. Now, if this was 10 years later, if this murders went unsolved for 10 years, and for example, and the police were still being, button-lipped, then maybe that's a little different. But in those first days and first weeks, you got to let them take their time, take the time to do things right. Eventually, a suspect was captured. The suspect, all the work they put in, despite the media saying they didn't know what they were doing, despite retired police officers going on all these channels and saying they don't know what they're doing, they did catch somebody. And his name is Bryan Kohberger, Kohberger. And he was caught at his parents' home in Monroe County, Pennsylvania on December 30th. So roughly 6 weeks later. Monroe County is in eastern Pennsylvania. Now, to tell you a little bit about him, I'm just going to read what they've put on Wikipedia. Bryan Kohberger was born on November 21st, 1994 in Albertsville. He grew up and lived in the Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton area of Pennsylvania, once again in eastern Pennsylvania. And for most of his life, Kohberger's parents were originally natives of Brooklyn, New York. Hello, Dr. Telesco. Shortly after finishing Pleasant Valley High School in 2013, he attended Monroe Career and Technical Institute in Bartonsville, but dropped out a year later. Kohberger later attended Northampton Community College in Bethlehem, where he earned an associate's degree in psychology in 2018. After graduating from Northampton, he worked as a security guard for the Pleasant Valley School District, the same school district where his father previously worked as a maintenance worker for many years and his mother for a time as a substitute teacher. He received a BA in 2020 and a master's in 2022 in criminal justice. And Dr. Telesco and I are going to have some time to talk about that. Then he moved to Washington State to pursue a doctorate in the same field at Washington State University in Pullman, which wasn't far away from Moscow, Idaho, and had completed his first semester there 9 days before his arrest. The Pullman campus is about 10 miles away from Moscow, Idaho. And you should know I have covered a disappearance that's still unsolved in Moscow, Idaho. The disappearance of Gayla Shaper, if you'd like to look that up. Since then, there have been a lot of things said about him, lots of rumors that he's weird. And I as a person who studies these things, I'm never quite sure what to make of any of it. I don't know if these people are just saying it because now that they know that he is a suspect in these killings, that they feel that they need to say this. I'm never quite sure. I think maybe in some of these other mass murders, I think there are probably a lot better evidence that maybe those guys had issues. I'm not so sure, and I don't know if it's so clear regarding Bryan Kohberger. But on Instagram, I got this from a People Magazine article that he had messaged at least one of the victims many times. And that goes back to what I said earlier, that when victims, when people have violence committed against them, they're the victims. At least 80% of the time, it is done by someone who knows them. And they probably know that person too. And this is why when I was getting into some discussions with some of my listeners behind the scenes, I have talked about all of this, at least a little bit here and there, since this all happened on my live show, the Unfound podcast channel here on YouTube. I have a live show every Monday night where it was a topic for a few weeks. And so I covered some of the things that I've already discussed here tonight. As far as court proceedings go, there are 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 felony count of burglary. There's a probable cause hearing on June 26th of 2023. So like 6 months from now, 5-6 months from now. And just what came out today or yesterday is that his defense attorney had once represented Zana Kernodle's mother in some proceedings. So that is what is, like I said, the very general facts of what has transpired since these 4 young people were killed. It's, what is it now? Over 2 months ago. So now we can go to the discussion. As I've already stated, what can we learn from this? Unfortunately, very sadly, we cannot bring these 4 young people back. It's very sad. And I've covered disappearances where they've gotten solved. And there's only been 1 disappearance that I've covered on Unfound where a person was found alive. All the others were found deceased. Some accidents, some suicides, some murders, and it's sad every time. And I've had to talk to those former guests. It's for them, it's very bittersweet. They want to find out what happened to their loved one, but they know when they find out, it's probably going to be bad news. So I'm familiar in dealing with people who have had trauma, very depressed about what happened. So we can't bring these people back. And this is why on Unfound, I so much stress education. I'm not fascinated with these murders. I'm not fascinated with disappearances. I just want to solve them. What can we do to solve them? And because we can't bring these people back, we have to make sure their lives mattered. I'm sure they were all these disappearance victims, murder victims, all doing good things with their lives. We have to continue that by learning from what has happened to them to try to make sure we do our best not to let it happen again. And one of the things we can do is remember, 80% of the time, the victims know who is harming them without question. And mainly for women out there, a man harming you, rape, robbing you, trying to kill you, the odds of them doing it is exponentially more than some stranger. It's not even close. Just remember that. Moving on, the media, as I've already stated, as a person in the media, as a person who just doesn't cover disappearances on my own, I always have a guest on Unfound. They tell the story. All I do is ask the questions and prep for an episode of Unfound. My job is to learn the disappearance as well as I can so that when we get to that official interview that goes on the record, I can ask the right questions. I can point the conversation in the right way so as to make sure all of you, the audience, understands it, because this is very important. Once again, all about education. The only way I can do that is getting to know the missing person as well as I can, the circumstances, the investigation, anybody around that missing person. I do all of that before an episode of Unfound ever happens. What I see in the media is like the opposite. They're all ready to jump to conclusions. They don't take the time. They are not doing any education out there. I find it disgusting. It's one of the reasons that you'll never catch me at CrimeCon, because too many of those types of people are there, and I don't want to be in the same room with them. I do not want to have pictures with them. I don't want to try to get their autograph. I don't even like saying their names. That's where I am. So I'm a little bit of an outcast. But at what point, but the problem is blood is big business. Or as they used to say, if it bleeds, it leads. This is the kind of media we have in the United States. I don't know what we can necessarily do about it. I just wish some more of these people had more of a conscience. They wouldn't be certainly covering it this way if it was their child, their brother or sister that had this happen to them. They would not be doing that. Because it's some stranger, I think they feel that, that this is what they can do. It's disgusting. At what point does all of this become exploitation? I think the media needs to really look at itself for all of this. And then as far as the experts, and maybe this is where Dr. Telesco can now get back in on this discussion. I watched enough TV. I'm not usually really a TV news guy. I get my news off the internet, but seeing so many retired police officers, retired detectives going after the Moscow police, going after the Moscow State Police, or the Idaho State Police, going after the sheriff's office, telling them that they don't know what they're doing. They're messing up the investigation. Whatever happened to the concept of the blue line? I wonder, and do they really need to make that buck from those media companies that badly. So that's where my notes end, and we of course leave some time for some discussion here, and maybe we have some questions and comments from the chat room as well.
Well, I have a couple of things I just want to say. Thank you so much for that really wonderful overview of the facts as we know them. And this is facts. And that's the reason that I actually asked you earlier about, well, how did you know that? And every single thing that you've talked about tonight is something that's already been printed and made public. We also know that in this country, we are innocent until proven guilty. However, we also know in this country that we try people in the square. And the square is now, social media, and all kinds of different ways. So we know that this individual, this suspect, it's still under investigation, and we know that, and we'll let justice take its course. But speaking of justice, this is something that we talked about before the show even really started tonight, in our little briefing. Criminal justice. Interesting. This guy's a criminal justice student, right? It's also interesting. He went to Northampton, which I didn't know that. Thank you very much for telling me that. But I taught there for a very short period of time as an adjunct. Isn't that funny? Now, not funny, just saying. It's just true. I taught there as an adjunct. Interestingly, he was also a PhD student, going for a PhD in criminal justice. And I think for a period of time, or he kind of put her on a pedestal or something like that, but he had a mentor or a professor. Can you just tell me the facts here on this? Dr. Catherine Ramsland, like how, because her name has been like plastered all over the place, and she was one of my guests. She's an amazing forensic expert and an academic individual who analyzes and looks at serial murderers, serial killers. And so 6 degrees of separation, it seems like my path has crossed in some way with this case, in some ways very minor, but nevertheless, what's your take on how the media has portrayed this particular fact, that Catherine Ramsland was his teacher?
Well, I should know, when she was on your show twice, I for sure watched the first one, and I think I caught the second one, and I even asked a question, I think, during the first one. I've not seen her comment on any of this at all. This is certainly not an indictment of criminal justice majors. Certainly not. Certainly not. But we have to start wondering, if he is the guilty party, if he killed these 4 young people, did he get into criminal justice because maybe he was just a little too fascinated with crime in the first place? This might be no different than when we think about pedophiles. What do? They end up going and getting into groups where they can be around children. Maybe we could think about like Boy Scouts or something like that. Should we think about Brian Kohberger in that vein? But I've not seen anything or read anything, any statements by her. But I have to admit, I did not try to find anything by her in prepping for tonight. I was actually instead going to ask you, in the last 2 months, it's almost been a month. Have you reached out to her to ask her about all?
No, because I'm not confused. I know that, my students doing something irresponsible, criminal, deviant, delinquent, fill in the blank, is absolutely no reflection on me. That's number one. So, no, I'm not going to ask her what she thinks. I mean, just like everybody else wants to ask her what she thinks. I'm That's my law enforcement background, by the way,
Okay.
kicking in. It's just like, no, I don't need to ask her what she thinks. I'm sure she's shocked, but at the same time, nothing really shocks you anymore. Why do folks, first of all, I adore my criminal justice students. I work very, very closely with my undergrads, but there are some who are maybe in criminal justice that might, be suffering from addiction, that might be suffering from mental health issues, that might be suffering from, a number of things. And this is what, the field of criminology, it's like the study of the criminal behavior or criminal mind or crime itself. And it's just like sometimes there's no rhyme or reason for why. But I really love what you said in terms of interpersonal violence. Yeah. And that it isn't the stranger that's going to jump out from behind the bush kind of thing. It's going to be somebody that and paths that have crossed. And back to what I said earlier about the wolf in me. I have my mug for you, just so you can see.
I see it now. Yeah,
this is one of my family members. But the wolf in us sometimes can smell that there's a problem with a person, but it's not until it unfolds. And then you start armchair quarterbacking and looking back the NFL tapes, playing the NFL tapes and seeing how did that fumble happen, right? Mm-hmm. So I really think that it's an unfair indictment of criminal justice students in general, number one. Number two, we don't recruit police from another planet. We recruit them from our society, made up of human beings, which are made up of complex variables. So in the same way, criminal justice students are the same. Now, maybe they're attracted because they're enamored with it. Well, that can be said about a lot of people. That could be said about people who watch true crime shows. That could be true about the folks who are binge watching on Netflix, the Jeffrey Dahmer case or whatever, and it's like, I don't know, it's not my thing. That's not my thing. But that's because my thing, my whole life has been law enforcement and criminal justice. So I like the medical shows. I like things I don't know enough about to watch, So, but anyway, that's I really would caution viewers to not paint a broad brush on criminal justice students. Or criminal justice professors, or anyone like yourself whose whole life's work is about raising awareness about missing persons, about murders, all of this. It's meant to educate, as you said earlier, not entertain, not exploit, not be opportunistic. And are there some criminal justice students that do stupid and criminal and delinquent and deviant things? Yes. Just like priests, just like doctors, just like lawyers, just like investment bankers, just like name it, that's human behavior.
It's scary. We go back to that show To Catch a Predator back. What was that, man? I'm showing my age, like 20 years ago. You look at all of the men who showed up, who were tricked into going to that house where they thought they were going to be having sex with a 13-year-old girl who was home by herself. Every guy there was from some different segment of society, from guys who were out of work to at least one guy who was a doctor. Didn't matter on ethnicity, age, nothing. This is the reality.
Yeah, I also would like to say, and I don't want to do a criminology 101 show here or do a lecture. At this hour, we're ready to start asking questions, not start lectures. But, there's the early pioneers in criminology. You talked about, why do people do what they do? What makes the criminal tick? What's inside the mind of the criminal, right? And they would say things like, well, it's choice. We have a choice. We make choices. We have rational thinking. Well, that's good if we're rational, but a lot of us are not rational, right? So there's, okay, let's put that on the shelf. All right, well, what else? Well, maybe it's biology. Maybe we're born this way, or maybe we have hormonal imbalances or chemical imbalances. We know definitely that substances play a role in, like alcohol, for example, lowering inhibitions. This is where we see most of the assaults happen, domestic violence, correlation between that and alcohol use. So biology, is it biology? Is it psychology? We know that it's not people who are suffering with depression necessarily, although they might be, right? But we've done a lot to look at antisocial behavior, antisocial personality disorder. Okay, fine. Is it sociological? Well, sociological falls into a whole bunch of subcategories. And again, the bottom line, all my students at the end will always go, oh, it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and a little bit of this. And that's correct, because human behavior is so complex that it's not reduced to a bumper sticker or a banner on a new, breaking news on CNN. It isn't. It's very complicated.
Yeah. Yes.
So, all right. Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You get the word, and then we're going to go to the questions.
Yeah, let's do some questions. Sure.
Good. Let's get Shannon to come on. Shannon and Layla. There's my bad rap. They get a bad rap. Oh my God, they're criminal justice students. Oh my goodness. What are we gonna do? Hit the deck. Okay, Shannon, you go first.
Okay, so
what's your take on all this?
I mean, I see a lot of this on the media, and something that I love that you do is how you bring coverage to situations and missing people that are not well covered, do not have attention like some other cases. But now, seeing that you're looking into a case like this and investigating into it, you already covered this a little bit, but do you find it a lot harder and misleading to find information about the case due to all the media and speculation everywhere? Or is it harder to find information on these lower coverage cases due to them not being covered as much?
That's a fantastic question. As I've not to every guest, but a lot of the guests, they long for their missing loved one to be known by every person who has ever lived. And I get that. Okay. That's why we do. We want to get the publicity out there, but there are downsides to that. You have people coming out of the woodwork. You have people going on web sleuths and Reddit, acting like they know the murdered person, acting like they know the missing person, because we could just pretend we could be anybody online, behind a fake name and not being, nobody can tell where we live or anything else. And so when there are those disappearances that I have covered that are well known, for example, the disappearance of Brian Schaefer, the person I had on there is somebody who, because unfortunately his family member, his mother and father are deceased and the brother just doesn't talk about it, but a woman who has been working on Brian's disappearance for several years. So I trust her. I've gotten to know her. And so she was the one who went through all of the, what's real, what's fake, is this true? Is that not true? Whereas you're right, when it comes to lesser known cases, lesser known disappearances, lesser known murders, you don't have a lot of that stuff because a lot of people aren't talking about it. And then the facts are much easier to discern, and you just don't have to look at anything maybe twice or three times. That's certainly true.
Did that answer your question, Shannon?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Yep.
Layla. Come on down, Layla.
Hi, Ed.
Hi.
Honestly, just hearing about this case, just the facts of it is really not interesting, but just really real, because you hear so much bias everywhere else, especially like beware type energy. But what I want to ask you is, why did you cover a case so recent? Like, why was...
Oh, well, as everybody knows, I don't really cover murders. Of course, I believe between 60 and 65% of the disappearances we've covered on Unfound are murders. And I could go, if we had another 2 hours, I could go through, I came to that conclusion. But I wanted to talk about this because This is something that was current. I wanted to talk about it because it's kind of what we might call a touchstone moment where it's been so publicized, millions and millions of people know about it. Well, that means that most people know what the facts are. You don't have to go through the deep dive into everything. And because of that, you can teach the public some really good lessons all at one time if anybody cared to do that. Because it's been something that's so well known, you can use this to teach your daughters about personal safety. You can teach people about what it takes to really do a good police investigation. You can teach people that the people who are most likely going to harm them are people they know. You don't have to go through all the other stuff of trying to get to know the victims or anything, because that's already been done. This is a great touchstone moment. So many people know about it. You can learn it. You can use it as a learning moment that can move our society forward if people were willing to do that. It just doesn't seem like a lot of people are willing to do that. They're more too caught up in the sensationalism of it and the criticism of it and the fascination of it.
Right.
Great. Thank you. Did that answer your question, Layla?
Yes, it did.
So Joey's going to come on right now, and he is going to represent the YouTube comments. And I think that there's a question that he is going to ask.
Okay.
Hello, Ed. Yes, we have one question. I thought we'd have more by now, but we only have one question from Kyra, who's a CJ student, undergrad student. She asked, what would you say the average time it takes to solve a crime like this? How many weeks or months?
Well, we have to understand, first of all, that these what happened in Idaho is kind of rare if we put it totally together. One person going into a house, killing 4 adults, even though they were young students, they were still considered adults, with a knife. Pretty rare. It might be more common in some other countries where guns are controlled, and I'm not really want to get into that. But in the United States, it's fairly rare. But as a good maybe example of something different, there were the Pike County murders that happened in Ohio some years ago, where a family, connected families like cousins and relatives, they were killed in 3 different buildings. And I think there were 11, 12, certainly like 9, 10, or 11, 12 people murdered, all by guns. And that took like 5 years to solve. So given that they were able to catch Brian Kohberger, if we are to believe he is the killer, catching him in 6 weeks is a lot faster than it took what they did in Ohio to do it for 5 years. And once again, this was one of those things where at the time they thought, oh, this happened, they're gonna solve this in a week. Didn't happen. And it turned out, as we've been saying, a bunch of people killing a bunch of people they knew, and it was over a custody issue. So, if you want to compare it to that, I guess they did a heck of a job in Idaho.
Gotcha.
Thanks, Joey. Anything else?
That was it. Just a
Okay.
I had, if you don't mind, really quick, I promise.
What's that?
The point that Brian might have been sort of into criminal justice so much so, and that's why he did this. I was reading an article from New York Times right now, and it says that he actually applied at the Idaho police station in the same county, city, 7 months before this. And, I just think that completely completes your point about what you said.
Yes. If this were a disappearance, let's just say that just one of these girls disappeared, and you were to discover that on her Instagram or TikTok that there had been somebody that was trying to contact her and she was blowing him off, which it does sound like what was going on here. There wouldn't be much doubt in my mind if her mother came on and that was the story that she was telling, that there was this guy who was under a fake name or something, was trying to go out with my daughter, and she kept blowing him off. And then one day she turns up missing in the middle of the night. It would be almost automatic in my mind that guy who was sending those messages did it. unless, once again, unless there are other things going on, but disappearances are about people. They're not about circumstances. Disappearances are about people, the people around them, how they're making the choices they're making, the people around them. Who do they know? What are they doing? It's not necessarily about the day of the disappearance. I think we could say that same about all of this, in that what my perception is what set this up happened well before these murders ever happened.
And usually is the case with a lot of murders.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I'm going to ask for Shannon and Layla to come on for a second. Okay. And I want to kind of close with this, where, I mean, we're going to close with a lot of shameless plugging, but before we do that, before we go there, I'm just going to bring my two amazing criminal justice undergrads on, and they're both steeped in criminal justice and the law. So, undergrads, these two are. What do you both think about this notion that the suspect is so immersed in criminal justice as a student at the undergrad, master's, and PhD? He was a PhD student. He didn't have a PhD. So what do you think about that? What's your take on that?
Well, my first instinct when hearing this went straight to what Ed said about how maybe he just had a fascination with crime, just super deeply interested in it, which is why he could have went into this field. But and then relating to what you said, I really don't think it should put a bad image on criminal justice majors, minors, anybody involved, because people that do these things are from every type of background, every type of education, like you said with the Catching a Predator show. So really, it just so happens that this one case was publicized and he was a criminal justice major. But I really don't think it should reflect. I didn't think that it didn't really impact me in a bad way at all, knowing that. I really just think it was his deep interest in it that brought him into it.
Okay. Thanks, Shannon. Layla, what's your take?
Well, honestly, for me, I was very surprised just hearing that he was a CJ major. And I think that goes to just telling, as far as just what you and Ed said, just that it really shouldn't put a bad reflection on criminal justice as far as it just being a major. I feel that, some people are in criminal justice to really bring forth change, to bring forth, some goodness. And you do have those bad seeds within, that specific major who puts a bad light on it. But I don't think that it should really deter people from criminal justice, have a bad look on every criminal justice student or even criminal justice teachers, as far as like his mentor being, one of the people like to name out. I feel that you can't place blame on what's going on with people mentally and other aspects which you have no idea, and just be like, well, because it could have been a doctor, it could have been any other major, any other student. So I thought it was surprising.
Okay.
Thank you, Layla. Thank you. So, Ed, last word and shameless plugs for your show.
I'm of course always hoping, probably sometimes when I talk about this topic, I feel like I'm shouting into the abyss, but I wish the media coverage of these things would change. Instead of getting on there and just pointing out the police aren't doing this right, the police aren't doing that right, because that's unfortunately, when it's going to change is when the public wises up to all of this. They're going to realize that they're getting taken for a ride, that these reporters who do this are feeding into all of their fears and sensationalism that we as humans naturally have within us. We have to deny those kinds of urges when it comes to stuff like this. This topic is much too serious to give into the worst parts of our desires. And the media is more than happy to do that, because scaring people gets more clicks and shares and eyeballs than telling everybody that it's, unicorns and rainbows out there. So that's my final word. And as far as Unfound, you can find it on Spotify and on iTunes. Tomorrow, we're covering the disappearance of Matthew Braswell, who went missing in Smithville, Tennessee on December 17th of 2021. His sister Amy was the guest. And we have a YouTube channel as well, Unfound Podcast channel on YouTube, and the website, theunfoundpodcast.com. Or you can email me, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com.
Great. Thank you so much, Ed. And thank you for being here. I just do want to read. There's a couple that have just come in. You know, remember with YouTube and the live stream, there's a little bit of a lag between the live and live stream. There's a little bit of a pause there. So we've got a couple of really good questions and comments that I'd like to read. And that doesn't mean that you have to answer them because we are out of time. Okay. But one of our students has asked if there wasn't much attention that was brought to this case with the inclusion of the public. Would you believe that this case would have still been as big as it ended up? I mean, I want to answer that too and say that there are some cases that are given a lot of play. And then there's some that aren't. And there's been some critics, and rightfully so, in terms of their analysis about this, that it has a little bit of an implicit bias feel to it. So that, you know, if it's this rich, young, white woman, let's say, who disappears, well, that's so much more important than, you know, women of color who disappearing all the time. So like, and yet they're not given any play. And I think that might be the tone of this question. Do you want to comment on that real quick?
I will tell you, I'll just stick to what I know. And as far as disappearances, this is in every presentation I've done at a university so far. I would say that there is a bias. I think there is a pretty person bias, certainly. That does not mean that other people, whatever that means, pretty, unpretty, ethnicity, race, they don't get coverage too. But it does seem that those stories tend to stick around in the media just a little longer. But the media, on the other hand, did cover when we had the terrorist attack over there in Orlando at a gay club. Of course, that got a lot of attention too. So and
that was also 50 people, right?
Yeah.
So
now 450, it's all horrible.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And each individual, and, you know, I've said this before in my work with the families of the victims of 9/11 and the World Trade Center attack, that while the families of Stoneman Douglas, Uvalde, Mandalay Bay, Orlando, Idaho, wherever it is that this violence is happening, it feels like every day. I mean, 2 in California recently. Just this last like week. But you know, the thing that I think we have to remember is that each individual family has an individual grieving process and an individual experience. It's not collective. It's not a collective experience. It's an individual personal experience. And that's what makes these cases and these traumatic events and mass casualty events so hard, exponentially. I want to read a couple more comments here. Melissa says, have there been any identified life triggers for Mr. Kohlberger, financial, relational, that may be the beginning of a motive or at least understanding of the accused's decision to act? I don't think that that's in facts presented.
The only thing I said, there was a People magazine article. It was other places too. That was just the one I wrote down there to remind myself that there's something that he had tried to. He was interested in one of the girls, and I did not write down which one of those it was, which girl it was, but she continued to reject him. That could certainly be something.
Yes,
so
it could be, but we don't.
But
once
once again,
don't know, right? 100%.
Totally sure.
Well, now here's a funny name. This is an extremely funny name for a YouTube user, and it's type 2 error. Now I have a feeling I know who this is, but I'm not going to say. But here is very, very good. It's very good comments. 2 great comments. The first is correlation. This person must be a scientist. Correlation is not causation. Correlation.
Yep.
Correlation is association. Right. It's not causation. It's something that most graduate students learn. The media likes quick connections because these are catchy. And as we said earlier, reductionistic, down to the reduce it down to a bumper sticker or a banner, right? On CNN.
That's right.
So, and Type 2 Error also says, I'm gonna call him Dr. Type 2 Error, says just like mental health and violence are not related, yet we hear about this in the media, just like Layla stated, it could be any other major and we would not be discussing this connection.
Mm-hmm.
And that's right.
Right.
Exactly right. Okay, Joey, please, can you come on? Are you going to share this with Layla, or are you just going to do it yourself in the interest of time? We're going to shamelessly plug the rest of our programming that we've got. We've got a lot of good stuff going on. Oh my God, Ed, you've got to hear this. You're going to love it. All right. Go ahead, Joey. Tell us.
Alrighty. So for February, 2 days after Valentine's Day, we're going to be talking about the case of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. It's called Will the Real Victim Please Stand Up? That's February 16th at 7 p.m. We're going to be bringing Dr. Lenore Walker. She's NSU affiliated. Then also in February,
Joey, I just gotta like plug this. I gotta plug Dr. Lenore Walker.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said Lenore.
No, that's all right. It's Lenore Walker, Dr. Walker. She's with the College of Psychology and at NSU. And I'm like starstruck with Dr. Walker because my dissertation was on domestic violence, and Dr. Walker's stuff was like all over my dissertation, especially my chapter 2 in the literature review. But anyway, so it's going to be this is going to be a tough guest. Ed, it's not because I don't love you and I'm not enamored with you. I am, but I'm going to be a little nervous on that show because I have her up on a pedestal, Dr. Walker. But go ahead, Joey. Sorry.
No, yeah, I'm excited for that too. As well in February, we're bringing back at Dentzel, of course, on February 23rd with a Missing Persons podcast. Then for March 9th, we have Maggots, Murder, and More. So we're going to be bringing forensic entomologist Dr. Adrienne Bunjard. She's from Texas AMU. She's a board certified forensic entomologist. Really excited for that. Then as well at the end of March, we have on March 23rd, Ed Dentzel with his Missing Persons podcast. And then I will pass it on to Layla to share April and May.
Okay, so in April, we're going to be having Sheriff Wayne. He's our regular from Brevard, and that's going to be April 2nd at 7 p.m. On our regular YouTube channel. And then we also is going to be talking about police mental health, which is Wednesday, April 12th at 7 p.m. And that's with Dr. Vincent Van Hassel. He's a police psychologist, so it's going to be really interesting. And then we also have Ed Dentzel on April 27th, and he's going to be doing Unfound again. And then May, we're going to have this alumni spotlight with Dr. Penny Brown Reynolds and Deputy Assistant Secretary for Management Operations. And that's May 11th at 7 p.m. And then just to close out May, we're going to have Ed Dentzel again on May 25th at 7 p.m.
You just can't get rid of me, Dr. Telesco. You just can't.
We're trying very hard to get rid of you, but I'm just kidding. We're totally not. That's just an inside joke.
Yep.
We love you very much, and we are very, very honored that you are with us, and that we continue to spotlight all of these really interesting cases every month. And so, yeah, please make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you haven't already, hit the bell for notifications. So this way, when we go live, you'll know. And Ed, thank you. Great show tonight. Really appreciate it.
Show.
Once again, I want to just, let all of the folks in the community of Idaho University, Washington University, all of the folks that have been affected by this particular tragedy, that we hope that the show was sensitive, was academic, and provided analysis. And it's, we always like to have something that's current and something that's relevant. And so we did. So thank you again, and thank you to Alpha Phi Sigma for always being so supportive of all the work that we do and helping us to advertise our criminal justice forum. So thank you again to my deans, Dr. Castro, Kushner, and Durham, all of the deans in the Fischler College of Education School of Criminal Justice. Thank you to my undergrads, my amazing criminal justice students. Thank you, Ed, and we'll see you again very soon.
See
Everybody
ya.
stay safe.